This week on the Stephen Herreid Show, good to know that when human rights and an innocent child's life are at stake, many Catholic leaders will bravely take a stand for complexity and nuance. Alfie Evans is a victim of secular leftism, and there will be many more if Catholics don't fight back. Is there truth to this allegation, sir?
Yet.
Vox has caught us red-handed. Catholic Vote helped WikiLeaks help Russia help Trump win in 2016. In this tell-all interview, Catholic Vote political director Jon Mercer confesses the whole truth.
And I mean, you couldn't write a novel, you couldn't write a sitcom or a TV show with this much good stuff. I mean, it's just straight out of a movie.
Trivia time. The judge overseeing the raid on Trump's personal attorney, A, was a Clinton pick for Attorney General, B, presided at George Soros' wedding, C, trained to be a Playboy bunny, or D, all of the above. Find out the answer from CRTV's Jon Miller. Hello, I'm Stephen Herreid, and this is the Stephen Herreid Show by Catholic Vote. You've probably already heard most of the story of Alfie Evans. In any case, I advise you to search for it online and just hear the tragic story for yourself. Essentially, this is another disabled little boy, not unlike Charlie Gard, who's been condemned to death by European courts against the will of his parents. First of all, let's name the evil we're dealing with. What's happening to Alfie Evans is secular progressive leftism. Now, some lefty Catholics are already saying, don't use Alfie to attack your political opponents, that's crass. Well, that's funny, I never heard you say that about victims of gun violence, whom you've used, I think wrongly, against your enemies in the gun debate. No, insofar as there are philosophical and policy positions that lead to travesties like this case, it's legitimate to cite this case in arguments against those philosophies and policy positions. And, as it happens, those policy positions and those philosophies are those of secular leftism. Secular leftism doesn't recognize the basic worth and dignity of the human person. In fact, secular leftism is materialist. It's what Scripture would call worldly, and it doesn't see any inherent value in the human person. To the secular leftist, life isn't an eternal adventure of a creature made in the image and likeness of God, or a call to eternal unity with the Creator and His saints. Instead, life is just a brief series of sensory experiences, which can either be fun or no fun. So when a person comes along who might not have enough fun to make his life worth living, or who might cost the people around him more fun than he's worth, the secular leftist might just toss him out of life, kill him. What's more, with no basic grasp of the dignity that comes with individual human free will, the secular leftist has no reason not to allow massive institutions like the state to take over and make really important decisions for us, including life or death decisions like the decision that should have been left to Alfie's parents about whether to offer him more care in Italy. Secular leftism is not a tool for creating Catholic social justice. It's an ideology that always victimizes the most vulnerable persons in society. Incidentally, that's why secular leftism has always been an anti-Christian ideology, because the church is all about serving the least of these persons, while secular leftism just wants to use, victimize, discard them, because secular leftism fundamentally rejects the idea of what a human person is. Ghastly stuff. And we have to fight it. In fact, as Christians, we have a special responsibility to fight it. When lives are at stake, and believe me, many of them are, not just Alfie's, but anyone whom the worldly might get away with victimizing, from Mideast Christians to black unborn babies in New York City, to the elderly in Hawaii, to Jews in modern Germany. When lives are at stake, part of the responsibility of being a Christian is making sure that those lives don't fall into the hands of untrustworthy, incompetent, or weak-willed defenders. Don't get me wrong, by the grace of God, people can change on a dime. But there are some groups, and certainly schools of thought, that just don't deserve to be entrusted with the future of Catholic witness against secular leftist attacks on human dignity. The Catholic left. Many on the Catholic left like to go after the pro-life movement, partly because the pro-life movement happens to tend to be very anti-secular leftism. They say, you only care about people before they're born. What about refugees? What about minorities? What about the poor? What about the marginalized? In other words, what about the secular leftist solutions that we have on offer for those victims? Give us more power! Well, as I've explained before, first of all, those victim groups have the same human dignity as the unborn, but they're not as much under threat because it isn't legal or common to just straight up kill them, as it is for the unborn. But anyway, Alfie is born. Alfie is a refugee. Alfie is poor. Alfie is a minority being disabled. Alfie is marginalized. And what is the evil Catholic pro-life movement doing about him? Well, we're all up in arms to defend him. And what does the Catholic left have to say about Alfie? Well, a lot of them have very little or nothing to say. Maybe because it's Alfie versus the secular leftist state, and the secular leftist state is all they really cared about defending in the first place. Anyway, those on the Catholic left who do have something to say about Alfie are mostly abysmal failures at really taking a strong stance for innocent human life when it's under threat. As I reported at the time, when European courts condemned Charlie Gard to death, papal biographer and Crux contributor Austin Ivory sided with the courts against the family. Like a lot of Catholic intellectuals, Ivory correctly cited Catholic teaching on end-of-life care, which is very broad and allows families to decide against further care in terminal cases, but then claimed, with no supporting argument, that the Catholic teaching leads to the conclusion that doctors and government officials have the right to make that decision for a family and to enforce it against the family's will if they resist. And then he condemned as grotesquely insulting the accusation of Charlie's advocates that the doctors and judges wanted him dead, even though that was the claim that Charlie's own parents had made. In other words, Austin indirectly scolded Charlie Gard's family for their outcries against the state that murdered their son. Despicable. And he has the same detestable position in Alfie's case. And Ivory wasn't alone in Charlie's case. America Magazine published an article against the pro-lifers who, quote, reflexively leapt to the defense of the Gard family. It's the proper role of the state to protect the best interests of children, the article said, even if that means resolving disputes from the parents. Charlie's advocates failed to recognize the nuances of Catholic teaching on end-of-life care. When life is valued so highly relative to other goods, its pursuit becomes detrimental. Unfortunately, neither can even the Roman Catholic Church hierarchy be completely depended upon. The initial statement on Charlie Gard from the president of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, hemmed and hawed about the complexity of the situation, but endorsed the doctors and judges who were, quote, called to decide Charlie's fate. The Archbishop wrote that the patient's best interests, at this point already determined by the courts to be death, were paramount. He repeated the exact words, best interests of, used by the judge who originally ruled against the parents' right to seek further treatment. And when it came to Alfie, true to form, Archbishop Paglia sided with the judge against Alfie's family in the initial ruling in March. A similar statement from the bishops of England and Wales was just as weak and amoral. The bishops even went out of their way to defend the hospital staff against the criticism of Alfie's advocates, instead of defending Alfie against the hospital. Good to know that when human rights and an innocent child's life are at stake, many Catholic leaders will bravely take a stand for complexity and nuance. These soft little daisies, these men, cannot be relied upon to defend innocent human life in a crisis. And it's not fair to victims to pretend that they can be. They're missing the point, whether they intend to or not, because they refuse to look the evil in the face, name it, and denounce it. Secular Leftism, the agenda that takes away our freedoms and responsibilities, also takes away our dignity as moral agents. It's no surprise that when we get universalized state health care, we also get a universalized state conscience. Under secular leftist states, individuals, families, and even voluntary associations like the Catholic Church are not allowed to make independent moral choices in providing for their own. Nuns can't decide against providing abortifacient drugs, healthcare clinics can't decide against advertising for abortion clinics, and parents can't even decide against starving their own children to death. Instead, these decisions are made according to the conscience of the state, which makes a point of being amoral and godless. This isn't a question of what's best for a disabled child. It's a question of whether we should give a secular leftist state the power to make those decisions for us and to enforce them against the child's parents if they resist. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised that when the soldiers come after the least of these, whom Christ commanded us to treat as himself, Judas shows up too, to give the innocent victims a little kiss before they're executed. Turns out, not every apostle is reliable. But it's up to Catholic anti-secular leftists, including laity, in this still relatively free nation, to name, understand, and act against this ideology, and not to hand the fate of innocence over to traitors and weaklings. We can't forget the lessons we've learned from the UK, from Charlie Gard, from Alfie Evans. We have to remember them in our prayers in our activism, and yes, when we vote. Again, since it's always the least of these brethren, the weak and the helpless, who end up in the crosshairs, being a Christian is a great responsibility. This is the Stephen Herreid Show, the show that's never wrong except on purpose. I'm your host, Stephen Herreid. And now the time has come for our weekly political discussion with Catholic Vote political director Josh Mercer, who joins us now. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing well.
You're holding up because, of course, what we're here to talk about is a big story just broken by Vox.com. It's a great expose. Apparently, Catholic Vote has been caught red-handed serving the interests of the Russian government. Is there truth to this allegation, sir?
Yet.
So what is this? What is going on? What were they saying?
Well, I mean, obviously the Democrats have spent a long time trying to pin Russia on Donald Trump. There's an ongoing investigation by the FBI Special Counsel Robert Mueller, all that stuff that's going on. And it's just been going on for months and months and months. And there doesn't really seem to be a whole lot going on. And so I think what some left-wing extremists are trying to do is to say, well, wait a minute now, let's talk about this whole WikiLeaks thing and the connection with Russia with WikiLeaks. And so Vox has this story out this week saying how the Kremlin may have helped Trump win the Catholic vote. There's a whole story here, obviously, but they make the point that Catholic Vote, my organization, obviously, was very skeptical about Donald Trump throughout his campaign. I mean, we make that perfectly clear. He never had a track record before. We thought he was going to be another New York social liberal. I mean, I have been extremely pleasantly surprised by how pro-life he's been. But they talk about how the Catholic Vote, not just our own organization, but just in general, Catholic voters just weren't so sure about Donald Trump. And then, of course, the Access Hollywood tape comes out and those concerns about Trump just get magnified.
Right.
And then days after Access Hollywood, what happened? Boom. WikiLeaks dumps out all these emails from John Podesta. Now, John Podesta was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign. But before he did that, he was with a left-wing group called the Center for American Progress. And that group got a lot of money from George Soros and a lot of other organizations. Well, here's what happened. He clicked the link he thought, reset your Gmail password or whatever, and it turns out he got hacked. And all of his emails got taken from Gmail, whatever. And WikiLeaks, years later, dumps it out right before the campaign. Those emails, though, were very striking. There's all these conversations between Jennifer Palmieri and John Podesta and all these people in the Hillary campaign just mocking Catholics.
Right.
Saying, conservative Catholics just want to, read about Thomist stuff and pretend like they're rich, they're powerful, and they like Catholicism because it doesn't make it, it's not too intellectual.
And because, real quick, I mean, first of all, you're breaking up a little bit. It's probably the Russian interference. But the one thing that's going on is we reacted to the WikiLeaks revelations of John Podesta literally working with other leftist groups to build Catholic infiltrator front groups to undermine Catholic opposition to leftist aims. And we reacted to that news because we're normal people rather than reactionary and defensive leftists. We reacted to the news of what was in the content of those emails rather than stopping and saying, I won't read these emails because they might be dirty or have connections to Russia. We didn't say, oh, good, the Russians have helped us. We just said, oh, this is horrible news. It looks like John Podesta has been working with Soros money to undermine Catholic witness against leftist causes. That was our reaction.
Exactly. I mean, Vox is making it sound like, oh, yeah, obviously Catholic Vote is some sort of arm of the Kremlin. When are they going to say the same thing about Cardinal Dolan? Because he critiqued these officials from the Clinton campaign for what they said about Catholics. He said they got to do something about this anti-Catholic stuff. And so should Dolan not have said that? I mean, it's a laughable article, and I got a kick out of it, I guess. But the fact is,
and I can't believe that anyone would say anything about our connection to Russia. I mean, our lack of there isn't one. I don't know why people would think there would be any connection between us and Russia. But anyway, you were saying?
Yes, exactly. Well, and the fact is, Hillary Clinton lost the Catholic vote and especially in states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. And she can blame the Russians all she wants to, but she wasn't connecting with, working class Catholic voters in those states. And Donald Trump spoke to them. And ultimately, you can blame the Russians, you can blame anything you want to, WikiLeaks or whatever. But the fact is, she was a terrible candidate and she couldn't close the sale with a lot of voters who actually, a lot of these same voters I wish they hadn't, but they voted for Barack Obama. They're not dyed-in-the-wool vote every time a certain way. They're independent voters, and they're the swing vote. And Hillary Clinton couldn't close the sale. She couldn't win them over. And ultimately, the Catholic vote went to Donald Trump in 2016.
Well, also, real quick note, Vox, did you talk to Vox?
They did not contact us regarding this story. No, they did not.
Did they call Brian?
No, they did not contact us at all. No.
Wow, that's interesting. Big expose story about us, and we don't even have anything to say in the article. It would be fun to get quotes from us. I bet they would have been really hilarious quotes. But anyway, viewers and listeners, do check out that article by Vox where they catch us red-handed serving the Kremlin against the U.S. Take it very seriously. You should probably unsubscribe to the Stephen Herreid Show since it is a Kremlin operation. And we'll talk to you again soon. Josh, thanks very much.
Hey, no problem. And I have never been an ambassador to Russia that I can recall.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Take care.
And now I'm joined by CRTV's Jon Miller. He's the host of the White House Brief, and he's got some dirt on the left that I think he'd like to share with our audience. Now, if you're a never-Trumper, one of the big problems with Trump is that you'd have to turn a blind eye, supposedly, to some corruption just to advance your team. But now, if you're really against Trump and you want to see him defeated, you've got a little bit of something that you've got to turn a blind eye to, and it's getting more and more difficult to be in that spot. What do you think, Jon?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like every single day we're getting stuff that shows that this entire Russian collusion investigation is just rigged. It's honestly a witch hunt. And one of the latest developments, which I kind of got a kick out of, was the U.S. district judge that they referred the case to that's now overseeing the investigation into Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, is a Clinton minion. She's also a George Soros minion. She was Bill Clinton's and Hillary Clinton's because Hillary Clinton was picking Bill Clinton's attorney generals for him, and she was kind of in that. She was their second pick for attorney general, and it turns out that she actually stepped out of the choosing because of the fact that she hired an illegal immigrant to be her nanny. Back then, you have to remember that illegal immigration was not cool on both parties, so it wasn't just that, now that would be totally fine. Back then, not so much. And then the other thing that prevented her from getting that gig with the Clintons as attorney general was the fact that she was a Playboy bunny in training. She dropped out, so she didn't actually finish the course, but she was training to be a Playboy bunny. But that's kind of all ancillary stuff, and it's kind of funny to laugh about. But the fact that she is that tight with the Clintons, and then the fact that she married George Soros to his wife, which you remember, George Soros has his fingers in everything, in charge of MoveOn.org, the Open Society Foundation. He also funded the Women's March. There's a list of things that George Soros has his finger and his money in.
Just to be clear, she married him, meaning she officiated his wedding.
She officiated the wedding, exactly.
Okay.
She did not get married to him. She officiated the wedding. But out of all the district judges that you could choose, you're telling me that it is a coincidence that the one that gets chosen to see Donald Trump's lawyer's case happens to be the one that's tied to George Soros? I'm not buying it. And on our side, we are people on the right, and conservatives, Republicans, they recuse themselves if they think someone is going to even smell a conflict of interest. And yet in this case, we have someone who it seems like they're intentionally choosing people who are tied to people on the left who are intent on bringing down Donald Trump in the presidency.
Well, what's going on, just to be clear to our viewers as well, is who is Michael Cohen and what is she doing to Michael Cohen? Right.
Well, I mean, he originally wanted to say, okay, they raided his office, and he said, okay, I first want to have my lawyers, my attorney-client privilege, I want to have them be able to look into what we release to the public and what we don't. Kind of like what Hillary Clinton was allowed to do with her emails.
Right.
So they wanted to do that. And then what happened is she kind of ruled and she said, no, our prosecutors are going to be the ones who get to make that decision.
Right.
So already right at the bat, it's an unfair, the raid in itself was unfair, but now at least not even giving the attorney-client privilege that ability to look through and sort the documents is even more unfair.
Right, and what's significant about this is that, of course, Michael Cohen, just in case you don't know, viewers, is the personal lawyer of Trump, Donald Trump's lawyer for quite some time. And this Cohen case, openly on the left, what they're talking about is, this could lead us to the material that will allow us to impeach the president. So they're sending up, and the judge overseeing the case that could build the case for impeaching a Republican president is a Democratic operative who officiated George Soros' wedding and also had an illegal alien maid and was a Playboy bunny. I mean, all of this stuff is just like, why would this not be a scandal? Well, it's not a scandal because everyone in the media seems to be willing to turn the other way, except for good folks like you, John. This is pretty wild.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, you couldn't write a novel, you couldn't write a sitcom or a TV show with this much good stuff. I mean, it's just straight out of a movie.
You know, when I first heard this stuff and I watched your White House brief when you reported on this initially, I thought to myself, John's making this up. In other words, he's on the payroll of some right-wing George Soros figure who makes this stuff up to embarrass the left. I'm sure of it. But I looked it up, and you were right. You weren't lying on behalf of right-wing George Soros. So thank you.
It's incredible. But I mean, this is the world we live in. I want this thing to end. It just is getting more and more ridiculous by the day.
Well, we'll keep updated by watching the White House brief at CRTV. Is that right?
Yes, you can find it. Go to CRTV.com. You can also find us at Facebook.com/CRTV. Also, I wanted to shameless plug here. I have a pilot that you can watch. It's called Out of the House. We're covering kind of all the stuff that I don't cover on the White House, all the cultural issues. But it's really fun. We have great guests. We interview Anthony Scaramucci, and you can find that on CRTV.com as well.
All right. So, viewers, next time you go on to Facebook to watch the Stephen Herreid Show, you might, I guess, subscribe also.
Yeah, you might wander over to CRTV's page and then subscribe, and you can use my promo code. Not that I'm pushing a product or anything.
All right. That's all right. No, thank you very much, John. I can't wait to have you on again soon.
Thanks, Stephen.
Well, that's it for this week. This has been the Stephen Herreid Show, the show that Steven Crowder watches when he's out of ideas. I'm your host, Stephen Herreid. See you next week.
Baby. What you got on your mind? Oh, yeah, baby.